and then you'll be getting the red stop sign when you're out of time. Thank you. First question, 30 seconds, goes to Rochelle. Please introduce yourself as a city council member and what would be your top 3 priorities?
Hi, good evening everyone. My name is Rochelle Leroy and I'm currently on the Santa Cruz City Council and I'm running for re-election. It's really hard to pick just 3 after being on council for 4 years and spending all the time going through our challenges, but public safety is one of them. Obviously, we unfortunately just saw an example. We need to be able to go to our public places and feel safe. Housing, and this might sound strange, but substance abuse, because that seems to permeate a lot of problems that we have, both in housing and, I have to stop. Next.
Good evening, and thank you for having all of us here. I'm Phil Crawford. I'm a candidate for City Council. I live on the west side, have for many, many years, but I'm a frequent east sider as well. I ride my bike over here quite a bit, and I spend a lot of time on the trail up here at De La Viega. The 3 things I think are most important are housing, of course. That's a big crisis here. I believe traffic and congestion would be the 3rd thing that's really a top priority for me.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige Concannon. I live in Seabright Beach area, a couple blocks from the beach in fact. My 3 issues right now are public safety, and public safety at this point. That is just a top thing we need to handle before we can start handling anything else.
Good evening, my name is Justin Cummings, and I'm obviously in the race for City Council as well. I have a PhD in ecology, and for me, the 3 things that I think are extremely important for the city of Santa Cruz: 1, environmental protection, especially in the face of climate change, because if we don't protect our environments, none of us will be here, and nothing will matter. The second thing that I would like to focus on is affordable housing, but with affordable housing, maintaining community integrity, which I know has been an issue on the east side. And then finally, tenant protections, because we need to protect our working class.
Can we just applause anytime?
It's best to hold the applause. Thank you. I'd like to be done by 8:30, and I think you would too, but thank you for asking.
I'm Greg Larson, and I'm running for City Council. My top 3 issues are promoting safe neighborhoods and a clean downtown by working with our neighborhoods, as I've done for the last 20 years that I've lived here in Santa Cruz, to tackle the housing and homeless crisis by working together collaboratively to find real solutions to the challenges we face, and protecting the environment in 2 particular ways. Advancing the Climate Change Action Program I started in 2007, and I currently chair the Coastal Watershed Council. We need to embrace the river.
Good evening, my name is Drew Glover. I was born and raised here in Santa Cruz and grew up through part of my childhood on the east side, which has been really great to have that sense of commitment and connection to the city. There are 3 areas that I'm focusing on specifically when I'm talking with people in general and when I'm on the council, and that is equitable budget management to make sure that we're spending our money effectively and using every dollar to its maximum ability. Affordable housing development, but also rent stabilization mixed in there because we want to make sure that we're doing it in collaboration with our community. And then last thing is fixing and solving our broken transportation system, since everything relies around transportation, budget, and housing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Donna Myers, and I wrote a letter to you all. It's out on the table outside, so hopefully you'll take a look at it. It's a little longer than the 30 seconds. My focuses as a council member would be neighborhood quality, including how we do our development in our neighborhoods. Obviously, public safety, both in our neighborhoods, our business districts, and downtown. And I also believe traffic and congestion is a primary concern to many residents, including parking within neighborhoods and other types of things like that going on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Hawthorne. I've lived in Santa Cruz for 33 years. I'm an East Side neighbor, and my big thing is I'm a mental health provider. I want us to focus on untreated mental health and addiction, and that goes hand in glove with what's going on with the nuisance crimes and public safety, and also maintaining the integrity of our neighborhoods and making sure that we have safe places to live in the neighborhoods that we love.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ashley Scontriano. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight because it's Friday, and these things aren't the best things to come to on a Friday night. So thank you. I'm commending you for taking a part in your voting education. Real quickly, my family has called the city of Santa Cruz home for 90 years. We owned a small business at the end of the Santa Cruz Wharf called the Dolphin Restaurant. I attended public schools. I went to UCSC for 2 years, and I graduated from Santa Clara in communication journalism. I think for me, the top issues are public safety. We'll get to the next two. Cliffhanger.
This is the second question. It's 90 seconds. This question was sent out to all the candidates Tuesday morning. Neighborhood protection and integrity. The general plan calls for buildings to be in scale and in character with the surrounding area. East Side, Midtown residents, and our mom and pop business owners are vulnerable due to our RL or RM multifamily zoning, the specter of the corridor plan, and the density bonus for development. Please present your philosophy and vision of how to protect and preserve the character and ambiance of our historic beach community east of the river. Phil.
Thank you. Microphone before you start with that.
I think there's two.
I've been told I'm kind of loud enough and I probably don't need the microphone. I really appreciate this question because you were coming to stop already. No, okay, thank you. Because it's part why I got into the council race. And I've looked over the zoning ordinances and have them here that you asked me to look at, and I've looked at them very recently because I went to the city council and complained when they were installing commercial jump bikes along our coastline and R1 zoning, that they were violating all of their plans, and including these provisions that are supposed to preserve neighborhoods. And they didn't seem to care, at least the majority didn't. There were 3 council members who did. So I think what has to be done here, and I have the corridor plan and what it's going to do, the current zoning and the proposed zoning, and there's some big changes. They got big plans for you over here, and they've got a big bulldozer fired up, and they're going to run it over you whether you want it or not. So the most important thing you can do is to elect folks like myself who aren't going to stand for it, and who aren't going to let them build without neighborhood support, and change zoning, and change the character of neighborhoods. Neighborhood preservation is one of the most important issues in this campaign, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
So I too have looked at there's a couple pages of zoning. So first off, I'm going to say that I'm not a politician. I'm just an everyday average person who's learning all this stuff right now. So try to be patient with me on that. But I have looked at a lot of this stuff, and me being in Seabright, I see our neighbors on top of neighbors. It would be nice if it didn't happen, but in Seabright, literally on one street, there's a house that's 2 feet away from the other house. And we have apartments, and we have condos, and they're next to $1 million homes. And it's kind of crazy. But I think that we can change some of that through SoCal Avenue, through the East Side, because we can change. I know change is hard, but we can do it. And we have to start thinking about how everyone can input and have good-looking buildings, have mom-and-pop stores again with the apartments on the top, have green roofs on the top. I think that's a fabulous idea that somebody sent to me the other day. I think that we have no choice anymore. We have to build, and we have to build for everybody, not just low income. But I think we can do it if we can just say it's okay for change.
So the East Side, in my opinion, is a hallmark community for Santa Cruz. I lived on the East Side when I first moved to Santa Cruz. I moved on Seabright, and I've lived in the Seabright area twice out of the 10 years I've been in and out of Santa Cruz. And the one thing I love about living in this neighborhood is not only the feel of being in a neighborhood, but the fact that you can walk to almost anything in this neighborhood. If you want to go to clothing shops, gyms, restaurants, if you want to go see a play or a concert, it's within walking distance of your house. And many neighborhoods can't say that in Santa Cruz. You can walk to so many things, and I feel like when I started hearing about the corridors plan and learning from the people in the area what was happening in Santa Cruz, it really hit me hard because of the fact that I feel like we need to try to maintain these kinds of spaces in our community. I know that oftentimes people think of if we want to build new, we need to tear down what was old. And I feel like as a community, we need to embrace what is historic in our areas and maintain those places. When they propose some of the new developments downtown, they've been proposing to tear down current small businesses that are local in our community in order to build multi-use buildings that have commercial on the bottom and residential on top. And the question I have is, who's going to be able to move in and pay for those rents? Not the local businesses that were there before. And so we need to make sure that the community's input is included in any decisions that are made when we're thinking about the ways that we're going to develop, especially on the East Side.
The East Side has to be preserved and protected. It's an eclectic, dynamic, diverse, and important part of our community that we just have to preserve and protect. Some things are being thrust upon us. The state density bonus isn't something the city ever adopted. It's something the state is forcing upon us. We have to revisit the controls that are needed to protect our neighborhoods with the state imposition of the density bonus. Second, we need to basically put the corridor plan, it's on pause now. I think it's on life support and we need to pull the plug. The corridor plan is dead. And we can't, please don't applaud, that takes away my time. And don't applause for anybody, let's keep the conversation going. But what I would recommend is let's turn city planning inside out. Let's start the planning in the neighborhoods, not at City Hall. Let's start the discussion with the businesses on Soquel and Water. Let's meet with the neighborhood groups online or in person and start the planning for an area plan for the Seabright and East Side neighborhood that we all want, not that's just coming from City Hall. Thank you.
So I live on the East Side. I live over in Pennsylvania. And it's interesting, when I was growing up, my mom used to tell me that I should go and take pictures of all of the old buildings because one day they would be gone. And when I was a kid, I kind of scoffed, and I was like, okay, whatever. But it's happening now, where a lot of our historic and old-time buildings that are the character of Santa Cruz are disappearing, and in place of them are really terribly designed buildings without the community's input. So one of the main tenets and things that I always talk about whenever I'm out in general, and that I hold near and dear to my heart, is the idea of representation. And making sure that the community voice is represented in the decision-making process and in the policy-making that moves development forward, especially within neighborhoods. The aspect of the 5-story buildings that are potentially going to go along Soquel Avenue, the shadows that it will cast and make it so it's just a tunnel, the issues of parking that are going to result in cars having to be pushed out into the neighborhoods, all of these are a result of the city not coming to the community and asking you what you'd like to see in your neighborhoods. And that has been consistent across the board, not just in the East Side, but especially in the East Side, which results in a delay, it results in conflict, and it results in waste of money that could be used in other ways to better improve the city and make things better. I think that we should start the development of this mid to high density housing in the downtown area while we start to revisit the corridor plans, especially on SoCal, and then move forward with a unified voice together.
I think that we need to put the corridor plan to rest. I certainly think that our community, your neighborhoods have spoke very loudly. You have a lot of expectation put on you by our new general plan in this area. And I think in walking the neighborhoods over the last couple months, I get a very clear message that none of you are really ready to go towards the direction that is currently mapped for you in our general plan. So there's a few things we can do now as a community. One is to start talking again about what the future of the East Side looks like. We do need to abide by our general plan. It's a legal document, but we can work on things like a specific plan or an area plan for your area. We can look at design review guidelines. We can look at design review processes. And we can try to look at how do we keep the character of the neighborhood, how do we maintain the historic parts of this area, and how do we continue to not overdevelop your neighborhoods, because I don't think anyone in Santa Cruz wants to see our community busting at the seams, and I think we need to be very careful, and I think we've made some major missteps in the past about how we're going to work with the East Side, especially in looking at future development. Obviously, there's a lot of pressure for housing. People are not able to stay here. There's a lot of issues that we need to deal with. So how do we balance keeping your neighborhood quality, but also providing some of these other things for our community?
This is a philosophical discussion, and really what it's about is how do we feel about the vision, who we are, who we want to live here, who are we building for, what are we trying to do together with our community. So I understand originally the zoning happened because on the west side the small farms were broken up more quickly, and so the zoning was R1. On the east side it took a little longer for the demand to show, and because the demand took a longer time, the pressure for the building and the zoning hit the east side harder than the west side. That's how we find ourselves in the sort of pickle that we're in right now. But the city council has the power to change the general plan and to change the zoning regs. It's a matter of courage, it's a matter of leadership, and it's a matter of listening to neighbors to find out what you want. So basically, you showed your power and your ability to organize with the corridors plan. It became very clear that the plan that was going forward now is not only just stopped, but it's dead. And so one of the things that we have to do is come together as a community and have a discussion. This is our Santa Cruz. Who do we want to live here? How do we want it to look? How do we balance what we need to do with water? I'm understanding from the players that they think we have enough water to meet demand, but that's in wet years or normal years. What happens in a dry year? We don't really have a mitigation for that. So my suggestion would be that as a community, we have a conversation about our home and what we want it to look like and how do we keep our neighborhoods together.
So here's the second platform that I didn't get to talk about. Number two, sustainable housing. You know, the state is pushing down a high-density plan for cities because housing is such a need and it's in such a crisis right now. But are you tired of being told what your neighborhood's going to look like? Because I know one of the reasons I chose to stand up and do civic duty is because this is my home. This is where I grew up. And I love everything Santa Cruz has to offer. And I can remember going to other communities up north, further north, and there's lots of tract houses, and it's just everything looks the same. And I've always commented to people, and they look at me kind of like, that's weird, that's where it looks like where I'm from. And I'm like, that's not what it looks like where I'm from. And so I love that Santa Cruz has, every neighborhood looks a little different, and every neighborhood has its own little niche. And when we don't, you and I, don't come out and use our voices and tell the city council, tell City Hall what we like and what we want, then you don't get heard. So just as involved as you are right now, coming and listening to us and choosing who you want to represent you, please stay engaged, because your council candidates need your support. They need your voices. And if you don't like the way something is in your community right now, stand up, because that's why the corridor is now being discussed. And I don't know about you, but high-density housing in certain areas isn't the answer.
So I do believe we really need housing. I think that's apparent. As a city council member, I have people come up and talk to me every day about either their inability to find housing or the fact that they don't like living 8 people to a 2-bedroom house. You have to realize that's also density as well. I don't know what's a type of density that we want, because I know there's a certain point where people who want to stay in the community and have talent and want to work here just won't live that way. And so Santa Cruz has a big hole in its housing supply. We've grown. I mean, we like to say that we haven't grown, but we've grown as a community, but we've grown mostly as single-family houses. And every study shows that what's really needed are small rental units. And I'm really glad that the city staff turned back their attention to downtown as the place for this type of development. It's the ideal location. The amenities are down there. I live downtown, and I'm even set up to the point where my doctor, my eye doctor, everything is within walking distance of my house. And I think having the development in that area will encourage people to not drive, and will encourage people to also utilize small locally owned businesses. So I think having it turned back to downtown is a win for the city. We will need to do some building on the east side, but I don't think it should be this blanket zoning that takes all of SoCal and all of water and treats it the same way. Oh, and I have to stop. All right, thank you.
Before the next question, sure. Look at this smell. Burning.
Excuse me.
Burning smell.
Can anyone smell a burning smell?
Is there a fire somewhere?
It smells like somebody's barbecue.
I also have a special request. If you have an empty seat next to you, could you raise your hand, because there are people in the back that are waiting for a seat. So if you could find your way, that'd be great. Okay, thank you. Oh, there's another one right here. Our security has just told us that she walked around the perimeter and there seems to be no impending danger.
Thank you.
So the next question is going to be, first, it will be 60 seconds, and it will be about zoning balancing, and Paige will be our first speaker. This is the question. Most candidates state their concerns for neighborhood protection. However, Seabright, Branciforte, and Central Park have doubled the density due to their RL zoning. What will you do to equalize zoning so all neighborhoods can be protected?
That's a pretty big question. Because I live in Seabright, I see it. I just shared a picture where literally one roof is cut to fix in the next door neighbor's roof. So I would hate to see that in any other neighborhood. We are just in Seabright. We are packed tight with all kinds of housing. And we have to start expanding elsewhere because we need housing. That's just the bottom line. We need to get it, whether it's on SoCal or Ocean or wherever at this point. We need housing. So that we need to all have a say in it also, not just the city saying you're going to do it this way and that's the way it is. Because that's not, obviously doesn't work very well, especially in my neighborhood. I mean, I couldn't believe when I went looking, 3 houses are sharing like a roof line. But we need more affordable homes. We need more affordable apartments, condominiums, studios, whichever.
So I think that the distribution of housing throughout Santa Cruz needs to be in some way equitable. And if the East Side has been taking on a lot of the increase in housing over the years, then we need to start focusing on some of the other areas in Santa Cruz that haven't taken on so much housing over the years. We've actually lost a fair amount of affordable housing and housing in general in Santa Cruz. For example, at 350 Ocean, so Ocean and Broadway going towards the levee, on the left side of the street, there's a line of about what used to be 40 to 50 units of affordable housing that have all been closed down and sat boarded up for a long period, for about 3 years now. And I think that is one of the prime locations that the city should be focusing on if we're trying to put in more affordable housing, because it's a site where there once was affordable housing. The city owns it, and we can put in more affordable housing there. So we should focus on those types of areas in Santa Cruz before we start thinking about tearing down historic buildings and building housing in areas like the East Side.
So I've been walking the East Side and been doing house parties over here for the last 3 weeks, and there's clearly a sense that we've been trodden on over here, and we have to change that at City Hall. And going back to the area plan we talked about before, it really starts with the character plan. What's the character of the neighborhoods and the business districts here, and what is it we're trying to preserve and protect for the future to keep the area strong? And then we have to look at where housing can go, in particular affordable housing. And like has been said by others, I think that has to start downtown and in selected basing parcels that are elsewhere in the city. And the biggest place it needs to go, the university needs to start housing more of its own students and not stick them into our neighborhoods. Thank you.
So after looking at the zoning map and kind of just getting a feel of the different zoning categories that they have, as well as the distribution of it, it's very clear that there is a severe over-distribution of mid to high density housing in the East Side area, especially in comparison to the West Side area. And it was asked at the previous forum that we were at, do you believe that there needs to be equitable distribution of affordable housing and high to mid density housing throughout the community? I believe that there is a way that we can move forward with the city council and rezoning specific areas to make it so that we can redistribute mid to high density housing in different places, but also do it in a way that incorporates the community perspective so that it's not always going to be high-rise, stack and pack apartment buildings, but instead additional ADUs, additional multiple family homes, stuff like that, so that we can maintain that feeling of community and the neighborhoods that we love. And also, the city council has the ability to rezone whenever they want to. Something that really made me run for city council before was because they rezoned affordable housing locations on Broadway and built a hotel. So it can be done. They got their own.
I think we're at a moment in time in Santa Cruz that is probably something we, after the recession and other things, we're struggling as a community to figure out how to equitably distribute a very real housing need. Probably the likelihood of types of housing that we would prefer not being in our neighborhoods. And somehow we have to restart our community conversation around this. I think that as I travel around the city, West Side, East Side, Prospect Heights, wherever it may be, there's a recognition that we are in the middle of a decision point as a community. And looking back at the expectation of the number of units is, I think, something we need to do as a community, so we understand how much building we can do with our water supply and others. So I'm in favor of looking throughout the city to look at this zoning question and see what we can do in other neighborhoods and other districts of town to see if we can share this burden equitably.
One of the issues is that we're told that we're 97% built out. So when is it that we call it? When do we say we're built out? And how do we deal with that in terms of what I think is a really important issue for us to talk about, which is economic diversity? How do we not become an isolated, rich, white community? How do we keep a workforce in town? How do we make sure that housing is available for people in an affordable way? I think we need to learn lessons from communities that have been doing this for 20 years. Many of them in Southern California had to face this long before we have, like in possibly in Santa Monica, for example. They really made a commitment with their city council that they would support and make a commitment to make sure that there was economic diversity. We can do that, and we need to do that. And then what it does is it actually helps us decide what kind of housing we will build, how much inclusionary zoning will be a part of that. In some of the places in Santa Monica, they have 50% inclusionary zoning.
Well, I'm glad this was mentioned before me because I didn't want to sound like the person to rain on everyone's parade, but when do we call it? When do we say we don't have room to build? With that said, though, I want to highlight a couple properties in Santa Cruz that have been sat stale for decades. One in particular decades, one not so long. But we could have housing there right now, but we don't. Why don't we? These would have been high-density units. Justin mentioned Ocean Street. 78 people were displaced and still displaced because of that property. And it is sat there collecting feces, collecting needles. Is that okay with anybody? Because I don't like that idea. It induces an area where we avoid. We need to look at our city, we need to look at the zoning, we need to expedite these types of projects where they make sense so people can live there.
Sorry. I can't see the end of the line, so I am absolutely willing to look at rezoning areas around the city to make it more equitable. But before I would be willing to change any zoning law, I would want to look at what type of impact it would have on building affordable units before I would consider that type of zoning. I think zoning is really a big deal, and we need to be thoughtful about it if that's the direction we want to go. But I also want to remind folks, and we have Measure H on the ballot, and I'm voting yes on it. I hope all of you are as well. But housing is not just the city of Santa Cruz's responsibility to provide when you look at the region as a whole, and when you look at traffic patterns. We actually haven't built a lot of housing in the city of Santa Cruz, but isn't it interesting that the traffic has gotten much, much worse? That's because they've been building more housing south of us. And so there are other ways to look at this. I think housing needs to be looked at regionally and needs to be reflected in our zoning laws.
It's all right. I'm going to go back to this question of getting the building doubled due to the RL zoning and the impact of rent support in other neighborhoods here. And my own experience as an attorney appearing before the Planning Commission and the Transportation Commission and the City Council is that there's too much deference given to staff who don't seem to get the need to work with the neighborhoods and to have them on board with whatever they're planning for their neighborhoods. And I don't see that across the board. I think we've got 3 very good council members who listen carefully, who believe in neighborhood integrity, and who are going to fight for that. But you need a 4th one, and it would be better if you had a 4th and a 5th one. And eventually had all of the council members who are going to support you and listen to you, because you're the ones that live here, and we don't need to be building things for people who don't live here and are trying to make a profit off of some kind of construction project.
The next question is 60 seconds. It has to do with traffic and carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the number of people, other living organisms, or crops that a region can support without environmental degradation. In the 1970s, the city manager said our carrying capacity should be 55,000 residents. Yet today, we are at 65,000 residents and growing 60% faster than the average town in California. Neighborhoods are already frustrated by growing cut-through traffic and major corridor traffic. What are your ideas to combat these growing problems?
It's a great question. I think that the city, and I know that a lot of folks have been thinking about the rail and trail, the potential for us to have more forms of public transit. And I think that that is something that we really need to begin exploring more. As we continue to grow as a population, we need to think about how we can get more cars off the road and yet move more people at the same time. And that ties in part to another point that I would like to make, is that we need to try to keep our workforce as best possible in Santa Cruz. As it becomes less and less affordable, more of the people who work in Santa Cruz are forced to move further and further away from the place where they actually work. And as a result, we're seeing an increase in traffic. If we're able to have a community where we can keep the people who work in the community and provide them with more forms of transportation so that they get to and from their jobs, we can actually have an impact in the amount of cars that we see on the road. We have the Jump Bike program. We need to try to think about how we can get more people in buses and offer free bus passes to people who are commuting throughout our counties so that they get out of their cars. And we need to try to keep as many people working in Santa Cruz.
This is one of those huge questions for 60 seconds. So just following up, work-live units I think are part of the answer. You don't have a commute problem if you're just walking downstairs in your pajamas to go to work. But it's the notion of work-live units, which we've done on the west side. We need to look at some of those where appropriate on the east side as well, when it fits into the compatibility of the neighborhood. We also have to support all modes of alternative transportation, and that's where there's already a revolution happening. My family's only driven electric vehicles for the last 2 years, hybrids for the decade before that. We just got an electric bike. All of our family use cycling as much as possible because that's what we have to do to encourage a reduction in traffic given the constraints, and it makes life easier. And the council has to embrace and lead on all of this by supporting bicycle lanes at all levels, from segregated bicycle lanes to improving that little concrete asphalt strip, the seam that exists on so many roads that's unsafe.
So if you remember to my opening statement of what my 3 issues were, it was responsible budget management, rent stabilization and affordable housing development, and transportation, because they all feed together. There needs to be a serious reset within the morals and values and focus that our city has. I work at the Resource Center for Nonviolence and train in the ideology of Dr. King. And one of the quotes I always turn to with him is that a budget is a moral document. And that is very clear to see where we can place our priorities and our values as a city when we look at the way that we spend our money and the way we prioritize things. So with regards to transportation, we need to get people out of their cars. The situation that we see downtown with the garage that's being built, that's so much money to incorporate more cars to get onto the road when we can be investing in alternate transportation systems, bolstering our metro system, making more frequent routes, partnering with people and other transportation agencies, but also doing it in a way that gets people that are currently in Santa Cruz to be able to stay in Santa Cruz because of rent stabilization. So much.
Well, I would venture to say that we're probably nearing, if not right up against our carrying capacity. And I think one of the main things is that our water supply obviously is the thing that ultimately will probably decide how many people will be able to live here in Santa Cruz. So I think that we're looking at a period of time ahead of us that we may be adding several hundred, maybe up to 4,500 new units of housing. But we haven't solved our water problem. We're looking at some major changes from climate change to some of our low-lying neighborhoods. So we're going to be looking at carrying capacity off and on a lot over the next 50 years because climate change is going to put us there. And so I think as a community we have some guidelines. We've passed some action plans and we need to dust those off and start looking at those to really understand how we are going to not only prosper as a community, but grow in certain ways, but probably not too much longer.
Well, with the release this week of the UN Climate Plan and update, I'm just stunned how little impact it seems to have on any of the public leaders. The truth of it is, my grandsons will be 12 and 10 when the earth may, as they say, fail. And I don't know if anyone really paid attention to what that meant, but it certainly hit me really hard. And so we have to take a look at everything that we're doing with new eyes. And if we're doing anything to add to our carbon footprint or doing anything to burn through our resources more quickly, we're going the wrong direction. And I think that what we need is a council that will have an understanding that Santa Cruz can be a leader, and the ways that we can be a leader is to make some decisions right now about what we're going to do with our transportation corridors, how we're not going to be building a highway, how we have to make traffic be more available to our workers that are being pushed further and further south. These are social justice issues, these are transit issues, and we have to come out together as a community and make a difference.
As you sit here, you may zone in and out, but I want you to pay close attention because you might be hearing people saying what you want to hear. High density, yay. But wait, we have a water problem. If I do nothing else, it's but try to be as transparent and practical and realistic as possible. We can be smart about the decisions we make for our future. But by being smart may mean making hard decisions that people aren't going to like. When we talk about being at 65,000 people right now, we also have a university that wants to add 10,000 by 2020 and another 20,000 after that. How are we going to house that many people? And our natural resources, if it doesn't rain, is going to be a really big problem. We currently do not collect our water runoff. Our fresh water runoff is not being collected. We rely on rainwater, and it is not enough to sustain everybody.
So, just to go back, it was about carrying capacity in traffic, right? Was the question about how we deal with traffic, or?
I'll repeat the question.
Thank you.
I know you know what carrying capacity is.
I do.
In the 1970s, the city manager said our carrying capacity should be 55,000 residents. Yet today, we're at 65,000 and growing 60% faster than the average town in California. Neighborhoods are already frustrated by growing cut-through traffic and major corridor traffic. What are your ideas to combat these growing problems?
Okay, great. Thank you for repeating the question. So, in this scenario, there's no silver bullet. There's not one thing that we're going to do and it's going to suddenly magically make the problem go away. I think jump bikes were a great idea. Normally bikes in other towns like jump bikes are used 1 to 2 times a day. In Santa Cruz they're used 5 to 6 times a day. So they're really being embraced here. So I think more of that type of transportation sharing action would be great. We need to make sure that city laws regarding home businesses don't impede the possibility of more people being able to work from home. And in fact, that's something that I've worked on as a council member, trying to see if the code that we currently have for today's business models and realities actually match up to what's needed. I think if more people work from home or work closer to home, we're going to have a lot less traffic and increase the availability of people being able to use jump bikes as a possibility to be able to live closer to work. And you know, one thing that is people just, oh, sorry, I was really getting into my answer. Sorry.
I believe that certainly on the east side, the capacity has been hit, and that one of the things that needs to be done here is look at changing the zoning so that you don't experience expanding until it breaks. There are other areas, even in the city, that could more reasonably accommodate growth, and we have to have it. But I think they were right, that we're probably 10,000 over capacity. One of the silver bullet ways of doing it, I think, is to do what Davis did and get the university to say, you're going to house all your students. Because there's probably 10,000 of them that are taking up space down in the east side, lower east side, and west side, and different areas where they're impacting us in a very negative way. If we can get the university to absorb all of those, which they should do, they did it in Davis. There's no reason, Davis is less impacted than Santa Cruz is by those students coming in. So we can do that here as well.
So it sounds like we all have the same answers. We pretty much all think the same way. It's kind of amazing to me how we all are on the same page about a lot of stuff. But I, for one, say the university needs to take care of their own students. I have a lot of them in my neighborhood already, and I think it's only a 2-bedroom, and I think we have like 10 people in there. I'm not quite sure. But there's going to be a time where we can say no more. And, you know, we can build what we can build right now, try to take care of what's now, but we're going to have to come to a point where we're going to say no because we don't have all the extra services anymore. And we also need to start taking care of the public safety, because if we don't get this public safety stuff together, no one's going to want to be here anyways, because it's terrible. As you saw Dave Lane, what a shame. So that's how I feel about it, along with all of my members here.
Thank you. Greg will take the next question. It's a 60-second question. It's about connection between transportation and housing. Building for density is on the fast track, while transportation infrastructure is in the slow lane. What are your concerns about the 5 to 10 year lag between the building boom and improvements in transportation?
Another tough 60-second question. So the city's been taking the right steps to activate and move as quickly as possible on the trail through the city of Santa Cruz. Unfortunately, the current construction boom has made those projects expensive, as it would for any variation of the rail trail that would have been proposed. So now the city has to seek more funding and go back out for bid. But we have to continue to accelerate the trail through all of Santa Cruz as soon as possible to create a new corridor of dedicated bike and pedestrian traffic that's safe for our neighborhoods. We can also focus our residential development where we already have the most transit and transportation infrastructure, and that's downtown. That's what's being proposed, and I strongly support that. So accelerate the transportation improvements and focus our density where we have transit available downtown.
So I'm going to touch on that last question that we had too, because I didn't have enough time to talk about it, but it feeds into this one really well. The situation, like I mentioned before, is a lack of prioritization and a misallocation of budgetary funding. That goes for cities, the city, and also for the metro. There's a lot of ways that the metro can have money moved around in different ways to bolster transportation, and this conversation has not happened for so long that we've built so many housing units that now work in this entrenched situation of transportation. I live on Pennsylvania Avenue, and if you don't get home before 5 o'clock, then all of the parking spots are gone. There's no way to get to anywhere South County after 2 p.m. without a 1-hour wait. Now, the reason, another person up here said that was because they're building housing in South County. I attribute that to the lack of renters protections and the lack of rent stabilization that's been non-existent in Santa Cruz for decades, which has allowed rents to become exorbitant and uncontrolled, which has forced people that live in Santa Cruz or work in Santa Cruz to live elsewhere. We need to stabilize rent, we need to build affordable housing responsibly, and we need to make sure we can bolster our transportation system.
I think we should all get on a bus because we do sound a lot alike. We should go on tour. I guess in the time frame that was mentioned in the question, in the next 5 to 10 years, I think the most obvious thing is to finish the developments that have already been entitled over on the west side. There's about 200 units of housing that have been approved over there within a mixed-use development, adjacent to decent transportation as well over there. Mission Street is going to be heavily impacted, obviously, by that. So I would agree that we need to get more jump bikes, look at trails getting put in. And then I think also, I'm going to agree with Greg here that the next area really of focus needs to be downtown. Again, We are not decided on the corridors, and it's pretty much dead. So we need to look at building in the next 5 to 10 years adjacent to the transit areas, and use those areas as a way to try to get people closer to their jobs and transportation.
Rather than approving additional housing, I think what we need to do is invest in transportation. So the EcoBus in Boulder that we've talked about at other forums, it really is a viable model that we could do in Santa Cruz, and I truly believe that as a community, when we had our water crisis, we conserved way more than anyone expected us to be able to do. I think the same could be true about single car trips. If people are given the incentive to ride the bus and given either free passes or low-cost passes, I believe people will actually take the bus if we improve bus services, if we make Metro be more like EcoBus in Boulder, where they're comfortable, they're hip, there's Wi-Fi, and they have music. It's very fun to ride, and I think we can do that. And the problem is that we've been underfunding our major transportation, and also I believe in Vision Zero. We have to make sure it's much safer for our cyclists to go across county and go across town, and that will help everything.
Can I see a show of hands of how many of you have used a bus in Santa Cruz, public transportation, on a regular basis? On a regular basis, like 3-4 times a week? Not a lot. Not a lot. And if we want to shift the pendulum, we need to get out of our cars. But we love our cars. And companies are coming out with new types of electronic cars. Electric cars, not electronic. Electric cars. And potentially bringing back hydrogen cars. And look at us, we're all excited to go buy the electric car. Greg talks about his all the time. So how can we get out of our cars and get on bikes? Because they're really fun now. Those are electric too. But we need to be realistic. Are we going to get out of our cars and jump on a bike? Are we going to rely on a bus system that maybe isn't reliable all the time? Maybe. But we have to trust it, and it has to be implemented to make it better for us to use it.
So this is a much bigger issue than the city of Santa Cruz. Our whole nation has been absolutely abysmal when it comes to transportation planning, and it's reflected locally as well. I was in Seoul, South Korea a couple decades ago visiting a friend, and we took the subway out to the middle of nowhere. And I asked him, why is the subway going to the middle of nowhere? And he said, I wanted to show you that in order to build new housing in Seoul or in this part of Korea, you have to build the infrastructure first. And they consider infrastructure to be transportation and moving people before you build the houses. Unfortunately, we haven't done that here, and so we're backpedaling. And as much as I want to sit up here and say, you know, we've got to get everybody out of their cars and onto a bus, the problem is the bus has to share the same road as all of the cars, and then the bus ends up taking a very, very long time. It took me an hour and a half to commute out to Cabrillo when I was a student. I was living on the west side of Santa Cruz. So, you know, it's not going to be perfect, but we can try.
Well, I think the question in many ways answers itself, and that is that this high-density building and low-density and low-progress transportation is causing gridlock and horrible problems, and it is poor planning. We need to invest heavily into the alternative transportations, and bike lanes are an excellent idea, jump bikes are a good idea, but we have to have safe bike lanes and safety with bikes. We're the highest city for fatalities on bicycles in the state the last time I checked. So we're really in trouble with the way that we handle bicycle safety. So we want people to use bikes, but we need to build more safe lanes, trails, and other things to accommodate that. And we also need to rethink high-density building. I know we have problems with rents and lots of things happening in available housing. But the answer is not just keep building more and more and more gridlock without thinking about the carrying capacity.
Again, we all kind of agree on the same thing. Except for one thing, my 8-year-old grandson is waiting for the flying cars. So instead of my trip to go see him in Sacramento, will only take about an hour. When he was born 8 years ago, I could go to Sacramento in about 2.5 hours, driving the speed limit. Now it takes me 4 hours with no traffic in the middle of the day. So I see this every day here at my house. 2 o'clock, traffic, stopped. People running down my road. I've been almost hit twice. Not okay. The bikes are a great idea. The bus is a great idea, but I would never ride on any of our buses at this point. They are too scary. And that goes right back to public safety. If we're not safe, we can't go anywhere.
So one of the things that I think is really important, and I mentioned this before, is that we need to try to keep more people who work in Santa Cruz, living in Santa Cruz. A lot of the new development that's been proposed, and including 555 Pacific that's been built, is targeting people with higher incomes than people who actually live and work in Santa Cruz. They're targeting commuters who work over the hill, who are able to afford a studio for $2,400 a month. Those types of housing are not going to solve our housing problems in Santa Cruz, and are only going to increase to the problems we have, because it's bringing more people in and not solving the crisis that we have already here in Santa Cruz. We've lost a lot of affordable housing due to Airbnbs, the rental inspection programs, and just loss of housing because some places have been closed down, and some long-term housing has now been converted into 9-month or short-term rentals. And this is one of the big issues. If people are moving further out and they have to come in, then that's going to be a problem. I think that buses, we need to increase more routes. I used to take the bus to UCSC. I can't anymore to go to work because there are no routes available. And so we need to start thinking about strategic ways we can increase getting cars off the road.
Thank you. The next question is 60 seconds, and it's about affordable housing. Our first speaker will be Drew. This is the question. We are in dire need of affordable housing, but over 90% of new construction is market rate, which causes gentrification and displacement. What are your ideas for retaining local residents who can't afford to pay $2,800 to $3,800 a month for rent?
Okay, so before I start on that, I just want to say, to answer the thing about we all saying the same things, we're definitely not all saying the same things. And if you listen closely, it's very easy to tell what each person is saying. It's vastly different than the other one. But just to talk about affordable housing, I am one of 2 candidates that has come out in support of Measure M. The reason is because of the need for emergency rent stabilization right now. The situation that we find ourselves in with people not being able to live here and exacerbating our traffic problem and all kinds of other stuff has come from a very lax leadership structure of holding developers accountable and making sure that they're actually developing affordable units. Now we're so backlogged with affordable units that we're having to struggle and go this route. If Measure M doesn't pass in November, then it's even more important that we have people on the City Council that are willing to stand in support of renters and renters protections and rent stabilization, but are willing to work between landlords and renters to figure out the thing that works for the entire city. It was a huge lost opportunity by the City Council now, and exemplifies the lack of leadership when having conversations about affordable housing, rent stabilization, and making sure we can keep people of a diverse nature in Santa Cruz.
I'm in favor of stabilizing rents immediately after the election, depending on the outcome, certainly. And I think in terms of the affordable housing question, I think we need to look at diversity of housing types right away. We need to look at ADUs. We need to look at some of the new rules coming out of the state with regard to construction materials and ways to lessen pricing on that. I think we need to also look at lived workspaces, co-housing, various things. I think what we're seeing right now with our development pattern is entitlements that were put in place 8 to 10 years ago. So yes, those approvals in today's world do not make any sense at all. Whether they made sense back then, I don't know. But We certainly have provided a lot of housing that is not affordable in the last 10 years, and we need to reverse that and become a smart community about how we do that. You've heard a lot already, though, about how do we do that without densifying, creating more traffic. So we're at a really pivotal time, and I think we need to be creative about how we answer that question, and affordability is very important right at this point.
So back to my discussion earlier of what they did in Santa Monica about economic diversity. I think our housing blueprint that was done by the community and 3 board members, Sandy Brown is here, she was one of them. I think it contains some really good suggestions about how to move forward as a community, and I think we ought to follow it and implement what was actually in the plan. But I also think it's really important to talk about how to do it affordably. So one of the things that a community member was teaching me is about SB 1226, which I understand the governor did not sign, but that means he didn't veto it, so it goes into effect. And the real issue is not necessarily the permit cost to build an ADU, but actually the code of making it affordable. And this, I understand, will allow places like garages that were permitted maybe in the 50s or 60s, if they were permitted at that time, that is the level to which the code has to be built. That will absolutely streamline the process and make it be that the 600 illegal units could become legal.
Affordable housing. What does that mean? Because when I hear affordable housing, there's a couple different definitions that can go to that, and I always wonder when we quickly answer that question, what are we really drilling down to? Are we drilling down to the hardworking individuals that have blue-collar jobs, our officers, our police officers, our fire, our teachers, our nurses? Is that who the housing's for? Affordable housing is for those that work, but it can also mean those that are out of work, those are on certain services, HUD-sponsored housing. It can also talk about those that buy houses under Measure O for affordable housing. So when we talk about affordable housing, it's really important to ask these questions. Who in our community are we talking about? Because when I say affordable housing, I want that to mean people that are working in our community and who can't afford to live here when they contribute tax dollars.
So affordable housing, or basically the amount that we need to make a significant difference in Santa Cruz, we can't only rely on the developers. We can ask the developers, or we can make the developers build a certain percentage that would be considered affordable. But most affordable housing in Santa Cruz has been built because of subsidies, government subsidies. And cities used to get much more money from HUD, and we used to have redevelopment agencies that the state allowed us to have, and that combination of money allowed us to provide partnerships with nonprofit developers and even for-profit developers. And when you look at the downtown corridor, around 50% of the housing down there is affordable. And so to me, the most important thing is to get some form of the redevelopment agencies back. I would love to say let's go to the federal government and have HUD give back the 60% it's cut to cities in the past 20 years, but we all know that's not going to happen. I too also believe in rent stabilization, also known as laws against exorbitant rent increases. Very important.
The median price in Santa Cruz County, as reading, is $980,000 for a home, and in Santa Cruz, I think it's safe to say it's at least $1 million, because it's higher than it is in other places in the county. So you're talking about the median house costing $1 million. That's a serious problem for people, and then who can afford that? And also, we have problems with rent. I don't think Measure M is going to make anybody suddenly be okay. We currently have a rent freeze on the rent rates, and we currently have for-cause eviction, and that's not solving the problem. It's very expensive. People are paying $1 million for a house, and then they're going to rent it, or they're going to rent an alternate unit. They have to get some money for that in order to pay their mortgage. So I think we have to be realistic about looking at this, and there isn't going to be a magic wand that just makes it all okay.
Affordable housing for everyone would be awesome, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately. There's just too many different laws, too many different programs, and like Ashley said, who's affordable housing for? I, for one, am all for people who work here should be able to rent a place, buy a place, because you are spending your money here. I think our teachers need affordable housing, our public servants, such as the police department. A lot of our police department can't even live here, and we need them here because our public safety is out of control. So I think with the rent freeze and the stabilization right now, that we can carry that over and then really discuss what all these things really mean to everyone.
So it's been brought up that we don't have redevelopment funds and that we're lacking funds to go towards affordable housing. So my question is, I want to work with the community to see what can we do right now. We can't wait for the federal government, obviously, to bail us out, so we need to start working together to try to solve these issues. I got involved with the rent control campaign when it first started off because I wanted to find people in the community who wanted to seek solutions to actually addressing the problem. And now that Measure M has been on the ballot, it turns out that there's a lot of people and there's a lot of contention around this issue. And I think that as we move forward, we need a city council that's going to directly address this issue in particular. It's not the solution, but it's a piece. Because what it can do is keep people who work in Santa Cruz here while we come up with more solutions towards building more affordable housing. But we can't do that by ourselves, and we need to have the input of everybody in the community. I also think that there are some sites that we need to consider, as I mentioned, past Broadway and Ocean, where we can build more affordable housing in the near term.
We have an affordable housing crisis in our community, and it's in part because the last affordable housing project of any size that was built in our community was back in 2007, the Tannery Apartments, which have been a home run for our community. If we're able to pass Measure 1 at the state level, Measure H at the local level, we can do it again. Imagine another affordable housing project like the Tannery, but maybe one that's dedicated to teachers, or to nonprofit employees, or to social workers. That's a critical need in our community that can't afford the rents or the home prices we have now. I happen to be seated between the two supporters of Measure M, and I just want to be clear that I don't support Measure M. I think it's not right to do ballot box legislation of such an extreme measure, but we need a collaborative solution. I managed effective rent control when I was town manager of Los Gatos. It can work if it's presented in a collaborative, moderate approach that meets the needs of the community.
The next question is another 60-second question, and we're starting with Donna. How are decisions driven in the city? There is wide perception among city residents that developers and staff lead development in Santa Cruz. What will you do to give community involvement more of a voice in how our city grows, what it looks like, and who it serves?
Well, first of all, I'd spend a lot more time out in the neighborhoods and less time at City Hall. I think that our job as council people is to set policy and to listen to our neighborhoods and our businesses and try to be your voice back down at City Hall. We set policy, and we should be working closely with staff to make sure that they're not driving our city and that they're not driving the things like development and other parts of what goes on in our city without our residents knowing it. So I would start basically with being much more out into the community, out in our neighborhoods. I think the transparency level of the city has fallen significantly. I'm sure many of you have been on the website. I can't stand it. I can't find anything on it. But I'd like to see a lot more outward information coming out into the community, using different tools, and making sure that our community understands what's happening daily or weekly.
Well, I think you're talking about money. That's what your question is about, and who's driving it. And I think that when you have developers who can make so much from housing right now, you know that some of those decisions are being handled behind closed doors. I think that, the job of a council member really is to go and listen and meet people, as I've been doing since July, knocking and talking to neighbors, finding out what's really going on in terms of how things look to you when you look out your door in the morning or when you read the newspaper, if it really feels like it's representing where you are with your family, if your values are being actually represented by the current council. And I think one of the things that we need to do is do something like office hours, have a regular time of checking in. This is beautiful space to meet in. Why not do it once a month with community members who want to talk? And I think the truth is the council members are supposed to listen and turn your hopes and dreams into policy, and that's how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go from the bottom up, not the top down.
I know the question was about, community involvement decisions being made for development. But I think a topic that would roll nicely into this is district elections. There is a topic on the table right now that a committee is going to be reviewing if Santa Cruz would benefit from having district elections. And essentially, each area would have a representative. And I believe that this would help. Now, the research and the consulting still has to take place, but just from a quick glance, having each area, west side, east side, lower west side, upper west side, having these areas represented with one person would allow the neighborhoods to come together and know that they had a representative on council that could hear their concerns, what works, what doesn't work, and really lead and be the leader for them on council. Because I think a lot of times we all get busy in our lives and it's hard to reach out to our representatives. This might help.
So I've actually had the job of council member for the past 4 years, and what I've discovered is it's really a balancing act. And so many times people will approach me and say, well, nobody I know likes X project. But a lot of times that person who's telling me I don't like this particular project, I've received 20 or 25 other letters from people saying they do like the project. And so we tend to all hang out in our own echo chamber, and so we tend to think that everyone's thinking the way we are, so how could a council member vote differently than we do? But I kind of liken the council members kind of in the middle of an eye of a storm, and all of this information is coming at us. It's coming from staff, it's coming from the community, it's coming from people involved in whatever proposal is coming forward to us. And I think the best thing that a council member can do is to take in all that information and then come up with the best decision that they can. And that's how I've tried to make decisions on the council. Sometimes they're not votes I like to take, but that's the reality of the job.
I think the question has a statement in it too, and it is that staff and developers may be willing to show instead of the actual design and zoning. And I just want to share with you some of the things that we were given here. One goal was to build an environment in harmony with its natural setting. That's one of the things they're supposed to be designing by. Another one was that high quality design that reinforces the community's unique character. I don't think that's what they're doing down there. And I think there needs to be some changes on the planning commission. And I would like to see people that look like you on the planning commission, who are activists, who come out on a Friday night very concerned about what their community, what things look like, how they're being built, how they're being designed, and are you following your own rules? And I think that we'll benefit if we change the nature of the planning commission. There's some good commissioners on there, some that are not so good.
So, as I'm sitting here listening to all the answers, I'm wondering why we don't have more developers and more builders who actually live here that are helping us do these designs, because I know that a lot of them have it on the side of their trucks: San Jose, Walnut Creek, Concord. So how can those guys figure out what we want? They don't. They live in a whole different world than we do. So I think that maybe if we are working with our people here, we might be able to get what we want. We as a whole community, because everybody has ideas and eventually somebody's going to go, that's the perfect one. So I think if we can keep that more in line with what we have here, then we have builders and we have people who know what we like, what we want, what we need. And keeping that money here in Santa Cruz won't help, not one bit.
So I very much believe that we need to take the community's voice into opinion, and we really need to think about the values that we have in Santa Cruz. We care about people, we care about our environment, we care about the integrity of our neighborhoods. And I feel like when we have a staff that is being driven by developers that's not taking into account what are the needs of the people who live within the community, then we need to start thinking about what are the priorities of that staff. I think that we need to hold the city staff accountable, and I feel like with my background in having a PhD in ecology, one of the things I really like to look at is the data that the staff is producing. If I hear that it doesn't pencil out, I want to see the numbers. And I think that we need to critically look at the information, because if there's information missing from the decisions that are taking place that are going to drive development within our community, then I think that we need to really consider who is actually informing us and who's informing the development of our communities. So I think that one of the things that we definitely need is transparency on our council and provide opportunities for you to voice your opinion and be included in the conversation.
Besides the issues I'm passionate about that I talked about in my opening question, the main reason I'm running is because I think our city council is just suffering a real lack of leadership. And that's not a problem of staff, that's a problem of the council not doing its job. Unfortunately, we've had 4 council members who, for a variety of reasons, have each chosen to serve one term. Micah Posner, Hillary Bryant, Pamela Comstock, and now Cynthia Chase. All for legitimate, reasonable reasons, but we've lost that continuity of leadership that's absolutely essential to have a council that's running the show. That's what we need, is a council that's seasoned, experienced, and ready to get up there to take action to provide the direction to staff, not vice versa. That's how we get development that we want. That's how we engage the neighborhoods in decision making. That's how we make sure we're balancing transportation and housing downtown, is to make sure the council's in charge.
So I'm a community organizer. It's what I do for work. It's something I've been doing for the last 7 years in Santa Cruz. And it has shown me the power that exists within community, the knowledge that exists within community, and the severe lack of engagement that the city council has made in reaching out to engage community about their issues and things they want to see happen. Instead, I've seen a very heavy preference towards staff decisions, even when it doesn't benefit the community. And it leaves me staggered to try to figure out the logic around that. I think it's absolutely correct that the leadership on the council has been lacking tremendously with regards to being strong in their stance against developers, regardless of what the staff says. One of the answers that we heard earlier was if they would ask developers. We're not there to ask developers, we're there to demand what we need for the city to be able to exist and move forward, essentially. But to do that, we need a mentality shift on the council and change the narrative away from it being profit over people and put it so that people are over profit, so that we're doing things that are better for the community in the long run instead of just for immediate profit.
Our next question is a 60-second question. It's about water security, and Cynthia Hawthorne will be our first speaker. This is the question. We have great concerns about our water security due to UCSC expansion, tourism, and our growing city population. Please weigh in on our water security.
Well, our water's not secure. We have no redundancy, and the one source of water that we have is the single source for not only just our drinking water, but it's also for our farms and for firefighting. So I know that the Water Source Advisory Committee actually did a very good, I always support volunteers that work in the community, and I think we need to honor their work. I think they worked really hard to come up with some solutions, and they do have 6 of them. And right now the thing that they're working on, of course, is to try to figure out if they can fill the aquifers with both groundwater and surface water. And my understanding is the data just came back that it actually doesn't affect the quality of the water. It's very expensive, however, to do that. What I'd like to see us do instead is invest in the infrastructure to actually take reclaimed water and make it be a higher purity than we have right now. So we're almost at the level, I believe, where you can use it for landscaping for businesses, but really it's a big push to get it into drinking water. But that's what we need to do.
I touched upon this a little bit before, talking about how we don't have a redundancy in our water quality and rather collecting our water. It's just rainwater. That's what we're using. And I think, the city tried to implement something with collecting rainwater in our home and potentially people using gray water from their home. I remember in the 80s we had a really long drought, and my family was the first to implement utilizing gray water in our yard to keep everything watered. And we had a city staff person come to our house and say, we're in a drought and all of your lawn is green. What are you doing? We're like, we're recycling our water. And I think ultimately what we need to do is look to ourselves to solve certain problems. Infrastructure of our current water system is outdated and it needs to be improved, but that takes millions of dollars. If we can look to each household and the sustainability of new building, we can implement some type of resourceful gray water collection.
Thank you. So in the years that we have average rainfall, we actually get enough water, which is nice. But with climate change, and all of us have been noticing, that hasn't been happening as often. So the WASAC committee got together, especially when the community was not in favor of desal, and came up with what I think is a really solid plan. And what's exciting is last council meeting, we're going ahead to stage 2 because the recharging the aquifer is showing promise. So that's great news. We are really great as a community. We're other than San Francisco, we use less water per capita. And believe it or not, the students and the people who live at UCSC use even less water than we do as a city. So luckily, we're really good savers, and I think that's that's our legacy as a community. I think though that we need to continue the process, and then when newer technologies come out, we need to consider them, but there's a lot of cost involved. The devil's in the details, so to speak. I think we're on the right path.
Well, I don't think we want to wait until we have a drought and figure out what to do. I think we need to keep our water tables up, our groundwater tables, and not deplete them. And in order to do that, we should be encouraging and incentivizing in our building codes systems that capture gray water and recycle it, systems that capture runoff water. And those should be part in our green plan and building to incentivize and to have people who are remodeling or building an alternative unit build in systems that protect our water supply, and we should incentivize that. I don't think it's the university that's causing the pollution here, but I do believe we need to move those 10,000 students back up there and let them drink the water that the university has instead of ours and use water there, and that will help.
So we don't have safe water. It's we have to rely on if it's going to rain or not. But I have to say that last year or the year before, when we were told to conserve our water, we did a great job. We saved so much water, and then we got a double bill. Not okay, but it was what it is. I think that using the gray water, especially if we're going to be building high rises, and if we put in, the green roofs, we're going to need the water. And that is something that that could be put in the plan when building some of these buildings. And I agree with Philip. The kids at UC need to stay up at UC. We are struggling to take care of ourselves here in Santa Cruz, and that's just such a big burden on all of us right now. And it would be great if we can figure that out sooner than later.
So we very much need to be concerned about water security, and especially in addition to our drinking water, but also sea level rise, because we're going to have a number of communities within the city that are going to be heavily impacted, which includes the beach flats and lower ocean areas. But when discussing water security in terms of drinking water and water availability, we really need to think about how we can conserve the water that we have. And part of that's going to be going through and starting to look at how we can retrofit a lot of our buildings that were built a long time ago prior to when we had these water issues, to see how we can make those buildings more ecologically sustainable, environmentally sustainable. In addition to that, we also need to think about how we're developing and making sure that those developments additionally are also trying to reduce the amount of water we're consuming. And we need to start thinking about ways that we can recharge our water tables. UCSC just built the coastal biology campus, and their parking actually has the capacity for water infiltration. And so we need to start thinking about how our roads and parking lots and ways are designed so that we can get more water back into the water table.
So the last question now is pretty critical of the leadership deficit at the council due to transitions, but I think we actually can give some thanks to the council for the work that they enabled a group of citizens to do through the Water Safety and Security Advisory Committee, where they came up with a reasonable plan that still has a couple more years to run out to see if it's going to work. First, they're looking at water banking as our primary solution. Second, we're looking at water recycling as the second solution. And only if everything else fails will desal come back on the table. But all of that is predicated on the city continuing to lead the charge in water use reduction and conservation, going beyond the state codes that are getting stronger and stronger in terms of gray water reuse and water recycling systems. So I did want to just highlight, I think water security isn't assured, it's a statewide problem. But we have a plan, we need to let it run out, and the council made the right decision a couple of years ago.
So a lot of these issues all fall back to having people in a position of elected leadership that are willing to kind of change the narrative, like I mentioned before. And as Dr. King called it, a revolution of values. Because we need to start looking at the ways not only that we capture our water and we distribute our water, like for example, if we were to capture more water and then put it out onto the ground and topsoil of Scotts Valley, then we can have natural water infiltration into our aquifers there. But also in partnerships with other cities, like for example, the negotiation that seems to be on hold between Santa Cruz and SoCal, with figuring out how we can share water and bolster each other's water security by adding additional or larger pipe systems that run between Santa Cruz and SoCal. It's important that we protect our water aquifers in general, because they are where we get our water from if we're in a drought. And SoCal is unfortunately already facing the threat, the very real threat of saltwater intrusion into their aquifers. And as soon as that happens, then those aquifers are gone forever. So it's important that we work together across municipalities to make sure that we have the resources that we need.
So we get our water from 4 places. We get it from 4 streams. 3 are on the north coast, 1 is the San Lorenzo River. The 5th source we get is from the Bells Wells, that is in an already overdrafted seawater intruted aquifer. So it's not that the seawater is going to get there, it's already there. So there's a couple things we're working on which are actually very, very revolutionary. And also I should mention that we also have a water storage problem. We have one of the smallest reservoirs in California, Loch Lomond. It's not going to change. We're not going to get permits to change that. So we have a storage problem, and then we have opportunity to share water. Those pipes are already built. They're in place. We're sharing water. We're testing that right now. Secondly, recycled water is now legal in California. It was not legal when the desal project was proposed. So this is a revolutionary new thing that we can access as a community. So we need to look at furthering our conservation, staying on track with that, recycled water, and then we need to get the aquifer recharge and trading system in place.
Thank you. We are now going to move into our rapid fire round. This is yes, no to the questions that will be posed. And the pads, if you notice, only allow 2 options, as is the case with the city council. There's no maybes on the city council. They either vote yay or nay. So we expect you to do so. Thank you. And also, could you keep them up because we're going to be recording your answers, and so I'll let you know when to put them down. Thank you very much for your patience. The first yes/no question is about crime and resources. The 150th anniversary levee cleanup dispersed more drug dealers, bike shops, mental health, and public health issues, and generally an increase in crimes to the East Side and its business district. Do you support allocating resources to help alleviate these problems? Thank you. You may put them down. You've been recorded. In unison. Okay, number 2, rental inspection program. The city's policy on the rental inspection program has resulted in the loss of hundreds of rental housing units. Would you consider reducing the scope of the inspection program to only enforce the most egregious health and safety violations? Thank you. City deficit vacation home tax. Knowing of the city's growing deficit due to pension obligations, would you support a vacation and second home tax as seen in Vancouver?
Undecided.
Thank you. Library parking garage. Would you support a vote of the people to correct the fact that the words, quote, library parking garage combination, unquote, were not in the original text of Measure S in 2016? Many voters feel misled by this fact.
What was the question?
Okay, I'll repeat it. Would you support a vote of the people to correct the fact that the words library parking garage combination were not in the original text of Measure S in 2016?
It's so confusing.
So would you allow...
Come on, there we go. When you say the vote of the people, do you mean like a election vote? Like if it was to go to a ballot and then they would vote that it was misleading? Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to get clarification of where this question... Could that be a city council vote?
attorney that directs their own. Energy advisory.
Do we have a lawyer in the house? Okay, I'm going, how about this? Do you support a redo of the library parking garage issue? It has been voted on and it has been passed by the city council. Would you support a redo of that with the next city council?
I'm sorry, it's actually in a planning process now, so are you asking us, do we support the current planning process, which is to now to go out to the people, or are you asking us to roll it all the way back?
I'm going to go on for now, and I'll see if I can get some clarification. Sorry about that. Okay. The next one is the density bonus ordinance. The state has passed the density bonus law to stimulate housing production, but also gave cities the ability, where the state is silent, to add language to protect adjacent properties through a review process based on impact. This review process was defined as the tiers of review, but the city removed it recently. Would you consider reinstating these small but meaningful protections? Thank you. Design Review Board. If you are elected as a member of the City Council, would you direct planning staff to initiate work on a Community Design Review Board as stated in the Housing Blueprint Committee Plan and the General Plan in your first 60 days? Thank you. Seabright rezoning or downzoning. To benefit neighborhood preservation, knowing that the density bonus could have impacts not only on the corridors, but also in neighborhoods throughout the East Side, would you consider rezoning much of the East Side Seabright area single-family homes from RL to R15? RL, by the way, is 27 units per acre, and R15 is 10 units per acre.
Real quick in the beginning.
So what we're asked, I'll give you the question, thank you. Would you consider rezoning much of the East Side Seabright area from RL to R15? And that would be a downzoning.
You said Seabright
And East Side, both.
Okay, so both.
Both,
Okay.
yes, correct, because they have similar issues.
All right, you just said Seabright.
And updating the general plan, because it has to match according to state law.
Yes. Thank you. Neighborhood parks. Knowing the deficit in neighborhood parks is over 50 acres, would you support adding parks to underserved neighborhoods?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question? I didn't hear.
There is a deficit in neighborhood parks of over 50 acres. Would you support adding parks to underserved neighborhoods?
Can I just add, we have the biggest green area of any city.
That isn't the question. We know about the open space and all that. We want to talk about neighborhood parks that children can actually walk to and play on swings and slides. Thank you.
Just make these ones safe first. Sorry.
Next question, thank you. Desal. A recent water department mailer stated the city's reconsideration of desal. Do you consider desal as an option for meeting our water needs? Thank you. The corridor plan. The corridor plan was put on hold due to monumental problems that were revealed over time. Would you amend the general plan to maintain the current zoning on the commercial corridors of Soquel, Water, Ocean, and Mission Street?
Then it's no. Okay, then I'll keep it.
Well, then you have to say it's no.
I'll bring more. Then it's passed. Now I need more than.
Well, okay. No, absolutely. I want you to have full clarity. Absolutely. The corridor plan was put on hold due to monumental problems that were revealed over time. Would you amend the general plan to maintain the current zoning on the commercial corridors of Soquel, Water, Ocean, and Mission Street?
I'm not clear what you're asking. Would we make it so that you can have the density or?
Right now, the corridor plan did not go through, and it would have made a lot of buildings up to 65 feet in some instances if they were on the nodes. Would you agree to keep the zoning as it is around, I think it's around 40 feet on those 4 corridors?
So that the density won't happen?
Correct. Well, yes.
When you said 40 feet, did you mean just height or the density?
That would be height. I'm just using that as an example, yes.
Is this vote now on the quarter plan? That's what.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to go back to that library garage. Are you in favor of the library garage? Yes or no?
Prior to the planning process that they're going to do.
Hold your signs up, please. In favor of the library.
Well, okay, I'm sorry if that's unclear. The city council voted for the library garage, as we all know.
So here's the struggle. 200 spaces, I could go with 600, I have no clue. That's what the planning process is going to answer.
Right.
So,
They're having it.
Do you,
Since I actually-
okay, no,
since- can I
hold on,
clarify?
stop, please. No, because I'm the moderator, thank you. Okay, so my question here is, the city council has passed the library garage. Do you support that decision? No?
We sent it to a planning process, we didn't actually vote on it. There's so many more details to find out to be able to
A lot
vote.
of people wrote and asked, they felt they had never voted yes or no on a parking garage library combination. They feel misled and that the vote should be taken again, is how that question was proposed to us. That if you want a library parking garage, that should be put before the people to vote on. The big deal over the parking garage, no one voted for one. No one voted for one, no one voted against one.
Not a little one, not a big one.
I think more of the problem is that the people that voted for the bond issue felt that they were ripped off because they would not have supported the bond issue if they had realized it was going to be a parking garage bond. And that's where the issue is. And it's kind of how I feel about my software sometimes.
So what's happening now is we're in a planning process and we all have a chance to be a part of that transparent and open process. And so what we all have to do is come forward and say exactly what you just said. You didn't get to vote on it, you don't in favor of it. Plans get changed all the time. Something, the council passes something, it goes to planning. The people say no, they changed the plan. That's what we need to do.
No, they moved it forward with the garage.
I have an idea. Why doesn't everybody take 30 seconds, and we have a few minutes, and I'm going to let you weigh in because I want to be fair and equitable. These concerns came from the community, and I want to give everybody 30 seconds to weigh in because I think that's the fair and equitable thing to do. So we'll start with Ashley.
Okay, so
30 seconds.
Okay, in 30 seconds. The current way that it's been addressed to the public with having a library at the bottom, parking at the top, and potentially housing at the top, above the parking, I do not support it. I do not support that plan. I do not like that idea. I do not want that area to be utilized in that specific way. There will be more housing coming to downtown. We will be losing close to over 200 parking places. So if you feel that parking is an issue right now, it will become harder. So there will need to be some place for more parking. But I really want to review why we'd be spending more money on a new library.
Yeah, just go down.
Okay. So what's happening now is, first of all, I love libraries. I think they save lives. I love affordable housing. We have to have some. The current plan, the ratio of housing to parking is off. And what's happening now is there's a planning process. So staff is now going to come out to all of us. They are supposed to be engaging with us. We need to all step up and say, how do we feel about this? We can change the plan. This is the chance for the community to say, I don't want them to be joined together, or I want them to be back on the old site. That's what I thought I voted for, or whatever it is that we want. They have to do an open and transparent process, and that's where we all engage.
Similarly, I support continuing in the planning process, and I'm not wedded to any outcome. I do believe that we should consider as a community a new building. The old building does have repair issues. We could make it work, but I'd like to continue with the planning process, and that's all I'm committed to at this point in time. And I think the community needs to be as involved as possible.
The reason I was raising my hand before, one is because I like to take stack, and two, because I think the better way that the question might have been phrased, at least what I was getting, is do you support the inclusion of a parking garage in the new library project? No, I do not support a parking garage included in the new parking garage project because we need to be discouraging people from using additional vehicles, not encouraging it, as well as the fact that we don't have an issue with parking on the weekends. It's an issue with parking during the week that we need to be dealing with. So no, I do not support a parking garage.
My top priority on this project is a new library, probably in a new location, because that's how we can get it to be a LEED gold library like we did in Los Gatos. Whether it's 200 spaces or 600 spaces is the big question, and if the library was being a standalone project, it would have to provide its own parking anyway, and we're already losing 200 spaces. So that's the question I think we need answered in the planning process that has to be done quickly to keep the money for the project, and that's why I supported the vote notion. There is public concern about the vote. Take it to a vote if we have to.
I just want to touch on the interpretation of the question because when I go door to door, what people ask me is, do you support a library garage? Which I think this question was asked in a very simple way. And I say no, because of the fact that it's built on city land, which we have very little of, and we need to think about having more housing. If it's been voted on and it's moving forward, then I think that yes, we can engage in the planning process and think about what is this going to be. But as it's been stated and proposed as a library garage, no, I don't think that we need to encourage more people driving downtown if we're trying to discourage people from using single cars.
I actually disagree with the library and parking spots also. I think it's a very big expense on all of us right now. And I was kind of surprised that it was going through that way. I found out from a city worker saying that the money was being used. We could spend half that money and redo the library that we have right now.
I don't think it was a confusing question. I think the question has been confused. But the Sentinel called it a bait and switch tactic because it wasn't in the ballot, and they're now going to use money that was for a library to build a garage. And you shouldn't have to sue them in order to stop them from doing that. And I believe that they need to do what the voters instructed them to do, and that is build a library or remodel the one that's there, not a parking garage.
This is an impossible question to answer in 30 seconds. I was actually on the council, so I'll give some insight. We had 4 options presented to us. One option was option B, which is what we picked. It was to include the library in a multi-use building that it would include parking. We asked that housing also be part of that. We asked that the parking be futurescaped, so if there was a point where we didn't need the parking, it could be easily converted into housing. So this is a complex problem, and there's not a quick answer, but cities don't have the money to do standalone buildings anymore. They just don't, and this is the future.
Thank you, and thanks for your patience with that question. Wait, this is the last question of the night, and it was originally going to be Ashley's, but I'm going to give it to you, Rochelle, because you're the next one down. It's a 30-second question, and it's about community priorities. What are the top 3 priorities you have heard from the community during your meet and greets and campaigning throughout the community?
It's really similar to what I said at the beginning of what my top 3 priorities are, but housing just absolutely floats to the top. It's what everybody talks about. Public safety, but public safety usually gets wound into the amount of homeless that we have living on the street. And when people say homeless, it's folks specifically who have addiction issues that are living on our streets that people seem to be really concerned about. And also just the ability of the city to provide services with our challenges coming up with our budget and the pension liability that we unexpectedly were told by the state that we need to pay back. So those are the themes that come up. Rent control, people are very concerned about that. That's a question I get asked almost every time I knock on a door and someone answers.
30 seconds.
Okay. I think it's public safety, which goes along with the civility in public spaces and civility in commercial spaces where people are going to shop and restoring the safety and feeling of being safe in their neighborhoods. That's been the strongest thing that I've been hearing about. Housing, affordable housing, and rent control is another that I hear a great deal about, and surprisingly even from homeowners who are talking about rent control because they're losing neighbors that they love and can't afford it anymore.
Of course, everyone comes to me for public safety, and everybody talks to me about public safety. We actually get calls before the police do. So my husband and I usually go around Seabright and help out most of the neighbors when there is an issue, because we can't get the police out there. So everything right now is revolving around public safety. We need to build houses, but we need them safe. We need to ride buses, but we need them safe. We need to have accountability for some of these people that are causing issues. So I'm just going to go with public safety.
I'd say the number one issue, Measure M or not, is rent control. Everybody has been saying that we need something to be done about how unaffordable Santa Cruz is, and that we need to do something to protect renters. And that comes from the people who have no on M signs and the people who have yes on M signs. So I'd say that's number one. Next would be affordability in general. So even if we do get more affordable housing, I think just affordability in general is something, because people aren't making enough to stay in the housing that we have. And then third would be mental health, homelessness, and public safety, and all of those combined.
Of the thousands of homes I've walked to, the overwhelming most frequent question is, where am I on Measure M? However, the deepest concern I hear from people as I talk to them at house parties and precinct walking is public safety. Most people are sick and tired of bikes and packages being stolen and cars and homes broken into, and we have to fix it. And that comes to the third issue, is people just want change. They want leadership. People that know what they're doing at City Hall to cause change and to work together.
I'd have to say it's a tie between public safety and rent control. People acknowledging that there needs to be rent control, but also in public safety. And after I spend some time talking with them about the interconnectedness of these different issues, they start to realize and see the connections between the lack of affordable housing, the lack of rent stabilization, and the population of people experiencing homelessness, which then increases the population of people using drugs, which then increases the population of people living on the street with mental health issues. So everything is connected, but it's specifically public safety, affordable housing, and rent control.
Yeah, the number one question I get is about rent control and affordability, and public safety and crime are right behind that. And I would say a really strong third, though, is the frustration with sitting in traffic and the impacts on our community from that as well. And then I also hear a lot of people talk about how we diversify our jobs here in this town, because we have a real wage discrepancy going on right now, which leads to a lot of the other issues.
What I'm hearing when I knock and talk with people in neighborhoods is what they're telling me is it sounds like nuisance crimes and public safety, but what they're really describing is the untreated mental illness and untreated addiction that is rampant in our community. And it's time for us to coordinate our services with the county and make a difference, and we really can. Back to the Future, in the 80s we were able to do these things, and we can do it again. And with the passage of Prop 1 and 2 and possibly measures H and G, for the first time in a generation we're going to have a sustainable pot of money to do treatment and make a difference, and you will be surprised how quickly downtown gets cleaned up.
You know, it's interesting. I don't know if it's just the nook of people that I'm talking to, but I get a lot of questions regarding ADU development and the permit kind of demands and regulations and what the city is seemingly not willing to do in order to help families build ADUs quickly and affordably. And I think when we talk about affordable housing, which is another topic that comes up along with Measure M, because this is such a polarizing topic in our community right now, Measure M, rent control, just cause eviction, I am not in favor of Measure M as it is right now, and I think ADU development and working with our community definitely needs to be streamlined. There's a lot more too, but I'm out of time.
We are done with our forum questions. Special thanks to the gracious church board, chaplain, staff, volunteers, those in the kitchen, and especially Byron on sound. Thank you very much. Thank you, candidates. My goodness. and for how much you care about Santa Cruz.
And a round of applause for our moderator.
And finally, to the community that makes Santa Cruz the unique place that we love.
Let's give them a clap.
Once again, if you haven't made any of your comments on the Post-its, please do. If you didn't sign in, please do. And have a great Friday night. Good night, and all be well.